Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. My name is Dr. Paul Myers and I'm the Director of Research and Development at the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, also known as the REMS TA Center, which is administered by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students, or OSHS. I'd like to welcome you to the webinar, Emergency Evacuations, Planning for the Whole School Community. During today's event, presenters from ED's Office of Special Education Programs, the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation Services, Salem-Keizer Public Schools, OSHS, and the REMS TA Center will discuss how schools and school districts can better prepare for an evacuation after an emergency. Participants will have an opportunity to pose questions to today's presenters in a question and answer session, which immediately follows the presentation section of the webinar, and also in a REMS TA Center Community of Practice, or COP, chat after the event. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the TA Center's website via our webinars page, along with an accompanying resource list within 10 business days. Links to both the webinars page and the COP are available in the web links box on your screen. Before we start, we have a few brief housekeeping items to cover. We'll reference several resources throughout this webinar. These items, as well as descriptions of them and their URLs, are provided in the resource list in the handouts box on your screen. As a reminder, there is no dial-in for this webinar. Audio is available via the link provided. If you're experiencing difficulty hearing the audio stream, please turn up your computer speaker volume at this time. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please contact the TA Center at info@remstacenter.org. You may also request technical assistance using the Q&A box on your screen. Questions are viewable to the webinar moderator only. To pose a question to the presenters during the webinar, use the Q&A tool on your screen to send your message to the facilitator. You may ask questions at any time during the webinar, although they will be answered as time permits following the presentation. After today's event, you can pose questions in our community of practice, or you can email them to, again, info@remstacenter.org. I'd like to briefly introduce the presenters for today's webinar. Their full bios are available in the handouts box on your screen. Greg Kaur is the Director of the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP's Monitoring and State Improvement Planning, or MSIP Division at ED. MSIP carries out major activities related to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, Part B, 611 and 619, and Part C, Formula Grant Programs. Diana Hollander is the President of the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation Services, whose mission and purpose is to provide leadership to state agencies responsible for pupil transportation. She's also the Program Officer for the Nevada Department of Education, with program oversight for pupil transportation and school emergency management. Robert, or Bob Macker, is the School District Emergency Management Specialist for Salem-Keizer Public Schools, where he's responsible for assisting individual schools with developing emergency plans and conducting drills. He's also responsible for developing the district plans and managing the Emergency Operations Center. We'll now take a moment to review the agenda. Madeline Sullivan from ED's OSHS, Greg Kaur, and I will first provide a brief overview of planning for school evacuations, including how to meet the needs of students with disabilities, as well as access and functional needs. Diana Hollander will then discuss some transportation issues that your schools and school districts want to keep in mind as they plan for evacuations to off-site assembly areas. And Bob Macker will share strategies and lessons learned from the local level. We'll close the webinar with our Q&A session. After the event, please join us on the community of practice to ask additional questions about this topic and to engage in conversation on this critical topic. I'm now going to hand things over to Madeline, who is a Management and Program Analyst in ED's OSHS. She administers the REMS TA Center with Bronwyn, our Director. Madeline represents the agency on federal working groups and initiatives such as the National Disaster Recovery Framework and Prepare-a-thon, alongside working with state and local practitioners. Prior to joining the federal government, she provided technical assistance on pro-social skill development, violence prevention, and school emergency management after having served as a special educator. Madeline, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone, and welcome. To build preparedness and to help ensure they're ready, schools and school districts should plan and create or review a school emergency operations plan, or a school EOP, with their community partners. This includes law enforcement, fire officials, public and mental health practitioners, and more. One important component is the evacuation annex. Schools should plan for emergency evacuations with their community partners, even if they're not required to by state or local legislation and regulations. Schools may need to call for an emergency evacuation in response to a range of threats and hazards, things such as even a building fire, a power failure, hazardous materials spill close to the school, or natural disasters, all which can affect any school. Fortunately, many aspects of evacuation planning build on existing processes and procedures that are used every day in the school setting, from individual classes moving in orderly fashions to and from recess or lunch, to procedures used during field trips. These support evacuations to both on and to off-site assembly areas. And when further considering planning for evacuations to multiple alternative sites, planners can work with the transportation staff and build from existing policies and procedures in place for transporting students to and from school, as they do on a daily basis, as well as other valuable plans in place, such as those that are used for athletic events, field trips, and more. There are two primary types of evacuation. The first is an evacuation to an on-site assembly area. This type of evacuation occurs when it's dangerous for the school community to stay inside the building due to, for example, a building fire. In this instance, the whole school will evacuate to an assembly area on or right nearby the school grounds. It's often places such as the sports field or a parking lot. Another type of evacuation, which is equally important to plan for, is an evacuation to an off-site assembly area. This type of evacuation may be needed when the whole locality, so that whole school building and campus, has been affected by an emergency. Things such as a flash flood might cause such an event. And basically, it's used when it's not safe to stay at the school site. Another reason an off-site evacuation may be needed is if the school's leadership knows the students will be unable to re-enter the building soon after an evacuation. In this instance, the school population, the students and the staff, and even their visitors might be evacuated to an off-site assembly area, such as another school, a nearby community hall or community location, or other spots throughout the community. And they'll be using school buses or other types of transportation. So in the remainder of this first presentation, we're going to provide you a very brief overview for planning school evacuations. My colleague Greg, he's going to provide you with some additional inclusive planning considerations in hopes of helping you ensure you meet the needs of your whole school community. Greg?
Thank you, Madeline. As schools work with their community partners to collaboratively create inclusive school evacuation plans, there are a few policy considerations that support the multidisciplinary team and pertain to students, staff, and visitors with disabilities or access and functional needs in the school setting. In brief, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, guarantees rights and participation by people with disabilities and their service animals as applicable in all emergencies and disaster-related programming, including school evacuation plans. The Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination based on disability, while the executive order reinforces these principles and requires public entities to include people with disabilities by addressing the access and functional needs of everyone. While the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which my office administers, does not specifically address school preparedness and emergency management, one of its outcomes is a valuable tool for planners as it creates meaningful opportunities for collaboration, consultation, and input by the special education team, the student, and the student's family. IDEA requires that schools must establish individualized education programs, I think we know these as IEPs, for each student with disability to promote their successful inclusion in classroom and non-classroom settings. The IEP details the accommodations, modifications, and services that the student uses, such as assigned seating, early dismissal from class for timely transitions, and large print study materials. These accommodations are based on the student's strengths and needs and are selected for their capacity to promote that student's success. The planning team can build on existing social and academic plans for students with disabilities to ensure they have response protocols that match their levels of ability. And if the school evacuation plan extends services already in a student, the school and their first responders are more likely to implement them successfully in the event of an emergency.
Thank you, Greg. One useful planning resource is one that many of you are already familiar with, the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans. We also call this the School Guide. You can download it from the handouts box right here on your screen. The School Guide was created in partnership with several federal agencies and departments, including Department of Justice and FBI, FEMA and DHS and HHS. And within this, it provides planning principles that are key to developing a high-quality school EOP. That's a School Emergency Operations Plan. These principles are, these planning principles are that one, the planning effort must be supported by leadership. Leadership can take place at many levels, including the classroom, as well as the building principal. We always want to follow a collaborative process and work with our partners who have roles and responsibility in school safety and school preparedness. And like many activities in the education setting, we want to use assessments to customize those plans to the building level and to that unique school community. Effective planning uses an all-hazards approach, and it provides for the access and functional needs of the whole school community while also considering all settings and all times. These last few points are especially important to consider. For example, all settings and all times. Most schools are used to conducting fire drills to evacuate the building during class time when most of the students are in their classroom. But how would students and staff evacuate if they are in other places, such as the cafeteria, in a sports stadium, or even on a field trip? And are people prepared to evacuate if an emergency occurred outside of regular school hours, such as when a community group is using the school site? And the other important principle is that planning must provide for the whole school community, and it must respect everyone's civil rights. That's to say, we need to ensure that the plan accommodates students, staff, and visitors, including their families. So whether it be those who speak different languages, have ethnically diverse backgrounds, or even those with disabilities and access and functional needs. To tell us more about this last topic, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Greg.
Schools should plan to meet the needs of the whole school community in an emergency. As Madeline was saying, this would include individuals from religiously, racially, and ethnically diverse backgrounds, those with limited English proficiency, and individuals with disabilities and other access and functional needs. Rather than treating these groups as separate populations in your plans, it's important to consider how their needs will be met in an emergency through an integrated process, through integrated systems and procedures. Again, schools can build off their existing protocols that are used throughout the school day to ensure everyone is meaningfully protected by the school EOP. For example, when considering alert systems or how directives would be given to people who have hearing impairments, planners can build off existing accommodations. This could include utilizing pre-written cue cards, hand signals, or sign language, as well as redundant protective measures such as blinking alert lights strategically placed throughout the school that are activated simultaneous to a traditional fire alarm.
The school guide provides a recommended 6-step planning process to review, revise, and even create a school EOP or the components of one. And this can also be used to create a functional annex with customized courses of action for a school evacuation. And remember, for each step, we want to apply all of the planning principles. So, for example, as you complete the process, you need to consider the needs of the whole school community, your community partners that are going to participate. You're going to consider all settings, all times, and then you're also going to consider a wide variety of hazards and threats. And as you do this, this will facilitate and enable you to include meaningful protocols all along the way. The 6-step process has a lot in common with those commonly used processes in the school setting, such as curriculum development and even the development of an IEP. Now, Paul and Greg are going to walk you through these steps in the next few slides. Paul?
Thanks, Madeline. The planning team is typically comprised of a core planning team that includes a multidisciplinary team of school personnel, community partners such as law enforcement, fire officials, emergency medical services, and local emergency management, and at least one school district representative. Later, when planning for evacuations, the planning team can look to others who may play a role in an evacuation, such as transportation and facility staff. The planning team should also collaborate with those of neighboring schools or school districts to identify ways the schools can support each other in an off-site evacuation. For example, a neighboring school facility could serve as an off-site assembly area. Local and state education agency representatives may be able to help facilitate that collaboration if schools don't have an existing relationship already. And NGOs who have a role in emergency management, such as the American Red Cross, may be able to identify off-site assembly areas. Greg?
When it comes to planning for those with disabilities, the core planning team should include others with expertise or experience in disabilities. This could include the special education team in your building, school and community social workers, the school or district's disability specialists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and other functional needs specialists, and special education paraprofessionals. One effective practice is for the planning team to consult with student representatives, which is especially important for students with disabilities. Paul?
Thank you. So in step 2, understanding the situation, the planning team uses a variety of assessments to identify possible threats and hazards to the school and surrounding community, assesses the risk and vulnerabilities posed by them, and prioritizes them for inclusion in the EOP. There are several assessments that can be conducted in this step, and you can find a link to more information on those assessments in the web links box. The one you should consider using is a site assessment. A site assessment examines the safety, accessibility, and emergency preparedness of the campus buildings and grounds. You can also use an assessment to examine the suitability of off-site assembly areas, In this instance, the planning team will want to ensure that enough supports or services are available at the location, such as restrooms, and that the location is suitable for family reunification if needed. Greg?
As the planning team looks at the school building and assembly areas, it should take into consideration the needs of those with disabilities or access and functional needs. For example, are there multiple accessible evacuation routes suitable for students who may be using wheelchairs? Are there locations that are quiet and would be suitable for students on the autism spectrum? Are there alarms with lights to signal a deaf student of an emergency? In each exit marked with clearly visible signs reading exit, is each exit written in multiple languages, including Braille? The National Fire Protection Association, the NFPA, has a personal emergency evacuation planning tool for students with disabilities, which is available in the resource list.
Thank you. So we're going to move into step 3, determine goals and objectives. Here the planning team decides which of the threats and hazards identified in step 2 will be addressed in the EOP and develops goals and objectives for them. The planning team can develop goals for addressing each threat, hazard, or cross-cutting functions. The goals are broad general statements that indicate the desired outcome in response to a threat or a hazard. Then the planning team can create objectives, which are specific, measurable actions that are necessary to achieve the goals. Then in step 4, plan development, identifying courses of action, the planning team identifies the who, what, why, when, and how to address the objectives. These answers become the courses of action at the school building level. On your screen, we have an example of a goal for before an evacuation. Equip the school to carry out orderly evacuations to on- and off-site assembly areas. Objectives could cover aspects such as training the school community in how to evacuate and conduct exercises, ensuring students with disabilities will receive the support they need, identifying on- and off-site assembly areas and creating agreements to use those sites, and ensuring the school community could be transported to an off-site assembly area. As the planning team develops goals, objectives, and courses of action, the group may want to consider the following. So first, locations. In addition to planning to evacuate classrooms, teams should consider how students would be evacuated from other areas, such as the dining hall, stadium, and buses. At least 2 off-site assembly areas should be identified, and one of those should be far away enough that it would still be suitable if the whole area around the school is affected. Schools should coordinate so they're not all planning to evacuate to the same location if there is a community-wide disaster. If this happened, obviously the off-site assembly area could be overwhelmed. And point number 2, unique situations. The planning team will need to identify how students who are not with a teacher or staff member will evacuate. Also, they will need to determine alternate evacuation routes to the assembly point for both on- and off-site evacuations in case the primary route is blocked or unusable. Also, how evacuation protocols will be integrated with other cross-cutting functions. For example, if you have to evacuate, how would you communicate this with families and other stakeholders? And how would you coordinate family reunification? Then the 4th point, the planning team will also need to identify what emergency supplies need to be taken with the school community when they evacuate. Basic supply list is available in the resource guide. Greg?
As well as the emergency supplies that may be needed by any student, teacher, or staff member, the planning team will need to identify what equipment or resources would need to be taken with students with disabilities and how this equipment would be moved. For example, identifying assistants or other staff that would assist in the evacuation of portable oxygen tanks, communication devices, augmentative communication devices, any medication, should all be considered in planning for students with disabilities' successful evacuation in the event of an emergency. Paul.
Step 5, thank you. Step 5, plan preparation, review and approval, involves drafting the whole plan. The traditional format of an EOP has three major sections: the basic plan, threat and hazard specific annexes, and functional annexes. The basic plan section of the school EOP provides an overview of the school's approach to emergency operations. The functional annexes section details the goals, objectives, and courses of action of essential cross-cutting functions, which is where information on evacuation will likely be included. And the threat and hazard specific annexes section specifies the goals, objectives, and courses of action that a school will follow before, during, and after a particular type of threat or hazard. The plan would also be reviewed by leadership and others who have a role in implementing the plan and approved. Greg?
This is an important step where the planning team should review the courses of action with each individual student to ensure they meet their needs and further accommodations and modifications aren't needed. The planning team should meet with the student, their family, and the special education team. The IEP meeting is another excellent opportunity to have this discussion. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you. The final step is plan implementation and maintenance. Here, stakeholders are trained on their roles and responsibilities in an emergency, such as an evacuation. Exercises, including evacuation drills, should also be conducted and include the whole school community, including teachers, staff, and administration. This is not only ensures they know how to respond, but it models to students the importance of taking the appropriate actions. Greg?
And when it comes to educating students with disabilities about their responsibilities in a real emergency or drill, the planning team needs to ensure the students and their caregivers understand the emergency response protocols, including those that are unique to them. Learn to communicate with the first responders in case of a separation from their caregivers. Be able to communicate specifics about needs and use any necessary tools such as personal evacuation plan, evacuation equipment, or visual aids. Just as the school EOP should be reviewed at least annually, so too should each individualized response plan for a student with disabilities be reviewed. Paul.
Thanks, Greg. I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Diana. So, Diana, over to you.
Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this presentation. It's very interesting already. So when it comes to transportation and emergency management, there are some planning basics that you need to know. You need to know your state and local requirements. You have a guideline, but in my state, there are also some additional local requirements that need to be included. So make sure you know what they are. For transportation, you really you do need to be part of your school's EOP planning team. And sometimes you have to be a little aggressive and make sure that you're included, because if you have buses, you are going to be critical to evacuations. Create and know transportation roles and responsibilities in your district. Planning activities should include providing support to drivers. They need to know what their responsibilities will be. You need to ensure that buses and drivers can be mobilized. If school's in session, and what do you do then? If school's out of session, how do you get these drivers mobilized quickly to provide assistance? You absolutely need to create agreements with agencies or entities where services might be needed, or you need to have agreement. I always use charter schools with them. If you're going to be expected to provide transportation services in an evacuation. And for those with contracted school bus services, you need to also include them in your conversation and assure that those drivers can also be used in the event of an emergency evacuation. The role of transportation directors is going to be critical in this process. They will need to identify off-site storage facilities so that in the event that buses need to be moved because of, let's say, rising water, you have a place where these buses can be stored and ready to be used. Put identifiers on top of the school buses so that anybody could identify that bus from the air. ensure, and this is a hard one, that your drivers have the ability to communicate with dispatch, to communicate with the director, and to communicate with any other entity included in the emergency evacuation. You need to conduct exercises, regularly conduct them with your driver so they are familiar with what their roles would be in the event of an emergency evacuation. And you need to familiarize yourself with incident management terminology so that when the local emergency responders roll in, you understand what they're doing and what they're talking about. Bus drivers are important in this process, and you need to train them on emergency evacuation procedures and protocols. What do they do? What are the protocols? You need to have a system for tracking and identifying who is being transported and where they're being transported to, and how you're going to handle reunification. Unique needs and requirements. The unique needs and requirements for transporting, of course, we've covered a lot of great information on special education students, but they are going to be our most difficult to evacuate, and so they need to be addressed, and you need to identify how you're going to handle them. You need to train bus drivers how to interact with public safety officials. They're kind of protective of their buses and their students if students are on board. And what is that protocol? What would happen in an actual emergency where you're going to need your bus is going to be used to evacuate students? And make sure that they know how to get to an assembly area, including alternate routes. If a road's been flooded or is impassable, what is that alternate route that the driver would need to take to get to a reunification or an off-site location? And roles and responsibilities for drivers. You need to ensure that your school buses are fueled at the end of the day. Very, very simple thing to do, but you want to make sure that these buses are ready to roll in any emergency and that you do not have to stop and fuel them. Drivers need to make sure that they're conducting post-inspections of school buses. So at the end of the day, they've inspected that bus. They've made sure that there are no issues with this vehicle that would make it not usable in the event of an evacuation, whether that's a flat tire or whatever the case may be. You want your drivers to participate in emergency exercises so that they understand what they're going to be doing and what their role would be. And then sit down with them and allow them to provide you with an after-action kind of input or a report. They're going to tell you what the problems were, and that will give you a great opportunity to kind of close those holes when it comes to transportation and evacuation. Oh, I guess I'm a little fast, but I believe that was it for me.
Great, thanks, Diana. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to pose them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them if we have time after we've completed the presentations. So I'm now going to hand the presentation over to Bob. Bob, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Okay. Looks like my intro slide just went away. Thanks. So I'm with Salem Keizer School District. As an emergency manager, I like to think about our school district as its own county, in that we have 172 square miles, 65 schools scattered across the area, a couple different counties, numerous cities, 40,000 students. We're the second largest district in the state, which is not as big as some, but it's pretty good size for planning purposes. And you can see the rest of our schools there that we help plan for from a district level. Most of our planning is done from a district level, as well as our response from a district emergency operations center. Okay, Paul, I'm not sure what happened to my slides.
Which slides do you want to be showing right now, Bob?
Well, it should be another diverse district one with the map. I can't see them. Can you see them?
Yes. So right now you have the map where it has diverse district as the name of the slide, and it has schools vary as the first bullet point.
Okay. Well, I haven't printed, so I'll go from that. I just can't see it. Which is interesting.
And then Sure, just tell me when to move to the next slide and I can forward those for you.
Okay. So in continuation with our district being diverse in its size, they range anywhere from 200 students to about 2,000 students. So planning for evacuation also varies based on the size of the school. The demographics, as was previously mentioned, we have kids from different ethnic backgrounds, different languages, disabilities. All those things have to be included at the individual school level, but also at the district level. Our schools are also located within the urban areas, right in the middle of town, which affects the ability to evacuate. In a more suburban area, different resources are available there. And then our schools that are in our isolated rural areas also have different planning scenarios based on what kind of resources are near them that they can evacuate to if they're moving off of their properties. So I'm going to go ahead and advance forward, and it should be reasons to evacuate.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. So as we mentioned, there are numerous reasons. I was just looking at our fire codes, our Oregon codes, and these tell us that we have to have routes and plans developed. We have to have procedures for assisted rescue. What does that mean for our students with disabilities? And I also look at not just students, but staff. And then we also have people who might be temporarily disabled due to injury or medical cause. So what do we do about them? Try to get the schools to look at that. Develop accountability procedures. Most of our schools use the red-green card scenario where green, all their kids are available or present or accounted for, and red, something is not right. But getting beyond that point, we haven't really figured out how do we account for all the students if we have to relocate them completely to another location. That gets a little more complicated, especially looking at high schools because of the diversity of high schools. We also look at the fire code that tells us how often we have to evacuate. So those things make it easy in our planning process because it tells us why we have to do it and when we have to do it. So those help us quite a bit. So we'll go to the lessons learned. Aha, I can see it now.
Okay.
So I've been with the district about just over 3 years, and in the past 3 years, we've only had to relocate one school. We had a bomb threat that we thought was viable enough that we needed to relocate. So we sent some district staff out there to look at their off-site location, and we discovered that the building was locked, and nobody had a key. We did not have a means to get into the building or contact anybody. Even if we did, the building would have been too small to house all the number of students that needed to be taken care of. The parking lot itself was too small. We couldn't even get buses in and house all the kids, plus the fact that it was raining and cold and windy. So it was just not a safe place to even take students to wait temporarily until we could get them buses or get parents to them. So it had no overhead protection, and we ended up having to relocate them to the next door school, which was an elementary school. So now we've compounded the problem with middle school students going into an elementary school, and this all, of course, happened towards the end of the school day, and we had to do a controlled release for 2 sets of schools out of one location. It was a wonderful day to do that out in the rain. So what do we do next? Some solutions to this. How do we plan around it? So we talked to the schools, and each school in our district is responsible for finding a viable location. Some schools, again, depending on their physical location, may not have someplace. We have schools that are right in the middle of housing communities where there is no church, community center, even a large park that they can go to. So that's a bit of a struggle. But we want the schools to do that because they know their neighborhoods the best. We've developed memorandums of understanding for these schools, so when they do discover a location, they can take that out to them. And I've gone out a couple of times and talked to the locations and let them know that this MOU is a liability for us in case we go in and all of our students damage their facilities. And most of the places I've talked to, once I've explained what's going on, they've been very accepting of allowing our students to come into their buildings. So I've also suggested, and some of our schools have gone out to actually visit the location, walk around inside, figure out where they would put the students, how they would put the students in by different groups. And then I'm stressing to them to try to practice at least one relocation, even if they just walk over to the parking lot and get there and get back. And, you know, always just figure out the best ways to do that. But some of the limiting factors for this, for doing all this planning, is there's just so many schools. We have a number of schools that are large, vary in size and diversity. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't project. Did I go forward? Paul, I should be on limiting factors.
Sure, I'll move that forward for you. You're now on limiting factors.
Okay, thank you. So the number of schools is a limiting factor because it's just hard to help plan with all of them. The diversity inside each school, working with them, like I mentioned before, the location of the school. Some schools, again, there's just no place for them to go once they get off their property. So what do we do to help them find some place or look for a good alternative? The lack of off-site locations, or the locations that are willing to take students in. Space. Again, some of our schools are around 200 up to 2,000. It's hard to find another building that can hold 2,000 students. We look at moving elementaries to mids to highs, or elementaries to high schools, but we discourage going down chain, high schools to middle schools or elementary schools, and our middle schools down as well, just simply because of the number of students and because of that kind of trauma of moving kids into another smaller school. And then the other limiting factor I didn't put on here is just time to practice. Due to constraints on education time, it's really hard to get the schools time to practice and to take time out of their day to walk over to another school or another location. And so that's one of our limiting factors, and it's just getting the district to try and accept that we need more time to do some of this. So like I said, most of our school level planning, okay, I should say school level planning.
Yes, it's on school level planning. Yep.
Okay, that should be the next slide. So each school is responsible for finding locations and routes. How do they get there? Where are they going to go? Schools and populations have special needs should talk about their own on-site specific plans, because we do have DLCs, developmental learning centers, with students who are severely medically fragile, and they need to help figure out how to get these kids from point A to point B. And even if all the students don't have to relocate, they may have to relocate their medically fragile students right away because of the weather. That's the schools relocate due to inclement weather. If we have a student who suffers from extreme heat or cold issues, we may have to think about relocating them to a shelter much sooner than the rest of the students, who could probably stand out in the rain for a little bit until we've got buses out there, our parents can come pick them up. I think I'm about at my time, and I'm at the district level planning now. Hey, it shows up. Okay. So at the district level, we do a lot of planning from the district level to help the schools be better prepared. So I have gone out, along with our safety officer that we have, and sometimes a risk manager will go out to the schools to talk about the evacuation planning, help them look at their schools from another set of eyes, just to say what would be the best route to get in and get out. Talk to the building owners, again, for anybody that's going to be sheltering our students. Been working with our special education folks to talk about our at-risk students. How can we best help them get out of the building? The one thing I've discovered in the last few months is our students in our DLCs, our developmental learning centers, where the most medically fragile are, sometimes they're in their contained classroom, but then other times they're mobile throughout the school, and they're not in their normal wheelchairs or normal powered chairs. So now if they evacuate, they're evacuating out of a different part of the school using equipment that's not really meant for them to be outside, which creates another issue for our special needs students. And then one of the things that we've done in the last year is developed evacuation videos and lockdown videos actually in multiple languages. And they're all translated into 10 different languages so that we can use these to help educate students on what to expect during different drills. They're not instructional for staff. It's a high-level video that just kind of depicts what a drill would look like or an actual event. And so, Paul, I'm going to turn that back over to you now that it looks like my slides are working.
Great, thanks, Bob. So we're now going to move into the final section of today's event, where you have the opportunity to pose questions to any of today's presenters. As a reminder, to ask a question, use the Q&A box visible on your screen. You can also email us at info@remstacenter.org. And we're going to start reviewing those questions now. Give me 1 second. So, Diana, I think this first question is probably directed towards you. What about if your school doesn't have access to school buses? How else could you evacuate your students? So, Diana?
Hi, good morning. Thanks. Good afternoon. I'm on the West Coast. Great question. You're going to have to, if you're in a smaller community that doesn't have access to buses, usually everybody provides transportation via school bus, even when they're smaller. So they're going to have them. But if you don't, then you're going to have to reach out to a neighboring district or a school that has buses and work out some type of agreement that they will provide services to you when you are going to need to evacuate the school for whatever that reason. A lot of places, the smaller rural communities, the buses are almost sometimes kept at the particular bus driver's home because they don't usually have a bus yard. So that driver is going to be able to mobilize by walking out her door, getting in that bus. But he or she has to know that they could be called upon to go transport students for a neighboring school. I see this with charter schools too a lot here in Nevada, where they don't provide transportation, but the district does. So you're not going to have buses. Have you spoken with the district, sat down with them and worked out an agreement that they would be able to provide the transportation for that particular school in a time of need? And generally, schools help schools. So it's just a matter of working out those details, sitting down and having that conversation with that particular district so that when that need arises, you're able to manage that situation quickly, efficiently, and in the best interest of the students.
Wonderful. Thanks, Diana. And this is Madeline. I would also encourage folks to have, as part of the process, someone from their local municipality, whether that's at the borough, city, or county level. Because this would be a resource that not only benefits the schools, but it would benefit the community. And we always say school preparedness equals community preparedness and vice versa. So if that is a need of the school district, it would also be a need of the community. And together, that planning team can consider it and prioritize it as they look to secure resources that facilitate safety before, during, and after possible incidents. But those community partners, although folks from the municipality wouldn't be involved in everyday planning, they're definitely worth looping in on an ad hoc basis, as well as including in your updates and your review process.
Great, thanks, Madeline. And I'm reviewing the questions now. This question's for Bob. Have you had any conversations about how your school buses would be used in a community evacuation?
Yes, actually. A year or so ago, we had some fires in the county, and the county emergency manager had come to us and said, could we use your buses if needed? And we discussed that with our transportation director and our chief operating officer, and we did come up with a plan that if needed, we would be able to get buses out to them to help transport people.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
And then, Bob, please,
yes.
how was the agreement formed?
To be honest, this one was formed more on like a time and materials cost. Mainly do a lot of coordination through email and phone calls. And I don't think we actually got anything formally signed because the fire danger had gone down. So we didn't actually need to execute the mission.
So you did it in order to be prepared?
Right. The need was the county emergency manager was planning to move people, and they ended up just moving themselves, and they didn't need the buses. So we didn't get into the whole formalization of the process, but we were talking about it.
Thank you.
And then, Bob, another question related to that. How involved do you get your local or county emergency management agency? Where is the tipping point to call upon I'll say it again. Where is the tipping point to call upon their assistance, and how are you keeping them appraised of the situation?
So I work really closely with our city and county emergency managers, and we communicate back and forth as a liaison to our agencies. It's kind of funny, though, because we actually have more resources than the county and city as far as transportation and buildings go. So they more often would call us asking for resources than us calling them. Now, what I will say, in this current situation, we're just talking basic emergency planning. We still have a serious water issue going on down here, and we have planned that if we can't put fresh water into our schools, then we would have to use our emergency management planning and response to get resources, water and water transportation capabilities to the schools to help get water into the schools.
Great, thank you. And another question, Madeline, I'm going to pose this one to you. You've talked a lot about evacuation planning for students with disabilities. Does the Department of Education or the TA Center have guidance on planning for other emergencies?
Sure, please, Paul. Did you ask if we have resources for planning for other emergencies?
Yeah, that's correct. So do you have guidance on planning for other emergencies? I'm guessing that would be guidance documents or resource lists or other support.
Thanks. So yes, in general, everything we do builds from our joint guidance that will help you and your community partners to all be on the same page. I encourage you to send an email to the REMS TA Center following this webinar and ask them to provide you with a brief overview of our services that we provide together. We have everything from virtual and in-person trainings, in virtual ones including our webinars and our online courses, and materials that you can download and turn around and use to provide training to your colleagues and your team. We also have a number of tools, interactive tools with supplementary file-based versions of them. One of our most popular and most frequently downloaded is our newest tool, Site Assess. It's a mobile app that facilitates the school with their community partners doing a walkthrough of their school campus and building to ensure safety in consideration of multiple hazards and threats, as well as accessibility. And then it also applies a few additional principles that increase safety and prevention throughout. And then actually, while I have my colleagues on the phone from the REMS TA Center, is there another resource you would like to highlight or identify?
I think the one that comes to mind immediately is, which folks are going to have easy access to, is the webinar on planning for access and functional needs. So it's quite easy to find that if you go to the REMS webinars link, which is in your web links box. If you search for access and functional needs, that'll pop up pretty quickly. So we have that webinar, which is in similar format to this one, and also an accompanying resource list. And I believe there might be a couple of other documents as well, so it's definitely worth checking that out. And then, Diana, I've got a question here for you. Within the transportation department, the driver hours are usually split into a morning shift and afternoon shift. How do you suggest a notification system for emergency need for drivers?
Hi, Karen. Great question. So you're going to have two situations that you need to have planned for. The first would be that drivers that are working and transporting kids to and from school, and what happens in the event of that emergency. So let's say you're evacuating students at another school, but currently you're transporting students. What is that particular situation there? And certainly we would want to drop those students off before we proceeded, or we would look for another driver that was available. When drivers are not at work in that split shift, or once they go home, you hopefully would have a notification system. Not only should you have a notification system for parents and students when there's an emergency or students are being evacuated or a lockdown system here. I usually know right about the time I'm being texted that there's a lockdown. So that you would have to have the same thing for your district. If you don't have an automated system that would be able to text drivers, which is what you would want to do. You don't want to have to call all of them. You would want to be able to send a text notification to them. Then you certainly should have just a listserv. If you're small, that's really easy. If you're larger, there's usually a different automated system that the district would use to notify drivers. If you're smaller, it would be as simple as a listserv where you would just send out that notice right away, a report to duty, and whatever instructions you are utilizing at that time. And it might not be all drivers. You might just need a few, or it could be all hands on deck, depending on the situation. But it's absolutely critical that you have that system. And the best way usually is a text if it's smaller. If it's larger, they usually have some type of a notification system for drivers. But again, that best method is going to be text for contacting your drivers. Most of them, you don't want their landlines. They might not answer the phone, whatever that case may be.
Great, thanks, Dinah. And I'm going to pose this next one, I think, to Madeline and Greg. I don't know whether you want to do a team effort on this one, but so one of the questions we have is, do you recommend safe havens or evacuation chairs for disabled on upper floors? Madeline or Greg?
I think that's a great question, but I'm going to let Madeline take it. I think she has a little more expertise in that area.
Thank you. So in general, you want to ensure that all students have equal access to the plan and its supports. And so, if in terms of evacuation chairs, these are a very strong option for schools, and we encourage you to take a look at the different types of evacuation chairs to ensure you would choose the one that best matches your audience. We have an outstanding partner, Dr. Jill Barnes from the Los Angeles Unified School District, who provides a great sample training on this topic, and we've included it in the resource sheet that is accompanying this webinar. So yes, evacuation chairs are a very good option to fully include the whole school population. As for safe havens, that brings on or creates additional risks, so you should sincerely speak with your community partners and with, as the planning team, to consider additional options or additional courses of action that better meet the needs of the whole school community. So there's a number of different strategies one could take, from modifying the actual building, not like doing addition. There's lots of things, architecturally things that can be done, to to modifying teacher locations within the school and those classrooms within the school. So for more information, I encourage you to pose this question on the COP, send an email to the REMS team, and work with your partners every step of the way.
Great, thanks, Madeline. We didn't have a time to answer all of the questions that were posed to us, so we encourage you to continue the conversation in the community of practice, which I'll describe that in a couple of slides. But first I want to thank everyone who posed a question, and a special thanks goes to our presenters. Greg Core and also Kate Moran, who helped create the presentation from ED's Office of Special Education Programs. Diana Hollander from the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation Services, and Bob Macker from Salem Kaiser Public Schools. If you have questions for any of the presenters after today, please contact the REMS TA Center and we will forward your request to the appropriate person. Thank you also for participating in this webinar. An archive will be available on the REMS TA Center webinars page within 10 business days along with the resource list. And you can continue to connect and collaborate with us in a variety of ways, including through our toll-free phone line and info@remstacenter.org. And be sure to find us on Twitter for daily updates on TA Center activities and important information and services from our collaborative partners. As I just mentioned, we've started a new forum on our community of practice to discuss today's topics in more detail, where we encourage you to pose questions to today's presenters, the OSHS REMS team, and your colleagues, or to share resources. You're actually going to be automatically forwarded to the COP on your computer when this webinar ends. If not, first log into the community practice, and you can find the button at the top of our website, and also the web links box on your screen. Once you've logged into the COP, click the K-12 public forums and then the evacuations forum. So again, say that again, the K-12 public forums and the evacuations forum, and finally the emergency evacuations reunification web chat post. Again, if you have any issues accessing the forum, feel free to email us at info@remstacenter.org. We're going to be live on the COP for about 30 minutes to answer any additional questions you have, answer the questions that have already been posed, and to hear any additional insight that you have to share about emergency preparedness and reunification, evacuation after a community-wide disaster. Thank you for your time today, and this concludes the webinar.